Interstellar really did bend space, time, and critics' brains when it first hit theaters. A lot of people walked in expecting Christopher Nolan's version of a sci-fi blockbuster. What they got instead was a 3-hour emotional gravity well that left critics arguing over black holes, crying over video messages, and wondering if hard science fiction had suddenly become mainstream again. But hang on, because this gets weird fast. For years, Interstellar basically sat alone at the top of modern, serious sci-fi. Huge visuals, massive IMAX spectacle, Nobel Prize-winning physicist Kip Thorne helping shape the science. Critics called it Kubrickian awe with Spielbergian heart. Even people who hated parts of it admitted the movie aimed absurdly high. Then Project Hail Mary showed up. And suddenly, critics started saying things like, wait, this might actually hit harder. On one side, you've got Interstellar, a cosmic opera about dying worlds, black holes, time dilation, and a father losing decades with his children. On the other, Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary, a nerdy survival story where a middle school science teacher wakes up alone on a spaceship and somehow turns astrophysics homework into one of the most emotional sci-fi stories in years. And critics are split in the strangest way. Some say Interstellar is still untouchable because no modern sci-fi movie has matched its scale, ambition, or emotional devastation. Others say Project Hail Mary quietly solved something Interstellar struggled with, making hardcore science feel hopeful instead of tragic. So this isn't just movie versus book. This is basically a showdown between two completely different visions of what science fiction should feel like. One says the universe is beautiful, cold, and indifferent. The other says the universe is terrifying, but friendship might still save you. And by the end of this video, we're going to figure out why critics, scientists, and fans keep putting these two stories in the exact same conversation. So do wait till we get to Project Hail Mary in the second part of the video. But first, we need to talk about the movie that already has a crown. When Interstellar hit theaters in 2014, critics genuinely didn't know what to do with it at first. Some reviews sounded like people trying to describe a religious experience. Others sounded like exhausted scientists arguing in a parking lot after an IMAX screening. Because Nolan didn't just make a sci-fi movie. He made a movie that treated physics like destiny. And that's what stunned critics. Kip Thorne, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who advised the film, famously gave Nolan one rule: nothing could outright violate known physics. That single rule shaped everything: the wormhole near Saturn, the spinning endurance station, the brutal time dilation on Miller's water planet, even the black hole Gargantua itself. And Gargantua became legendary almost immediately. Critics at places like The Guardian and the New York Times called it one of the most visually overwhelming things they'd ever seen in a science fiction film. Scientists started praising it too, because the visual effects team simulated gravitational lensing so accurately that the rendering process literally contributed to scientific research papers. That's insane. Most movies fake science just enough to look convincing. Interstellar accidentally generated publishable astrophysics. But here's the thing critics kept coming back to. The science wasn't there just to sound smart, it was there to hurt you emotionally. And nowhere hit harder than Miller's planet. The setup sounds simple. Cooper and the crew land on a water planet near Gargantua. Because of the black hole's gravity, every hour on the surface equals 7 years back on Earth. That's already terrifying, but critics said the genius of the sequence is how Nolan turns relativity into horror. Every second feels expensive. Every mistake feels irreversible. The giant waves aren't just action spectacle, they're time itself attacking the characters. Then Cooper comes back to the ship and watches 23 years of missed messages from his children. That scene broke people. Reviewers called it the most devastating use of relativity ever put on screen. Others said it was the exact moment Interstellar stopped being about space and became about grief. Because the real villain in the movie isn't the black hole, it's time. And critics loved that. Hans Zimmer's score pushed the whole thing even further. The giant church organ, the overwhelming bass, the way docking scenes suddenly feel like apocalyptic religious ceremonies. Reviewers described the soundtrack as a cathedral for space. Interstellar didn't feel like a normal blockbuster. It felt gigantic, heavy, spiritual, like the movie itself was trying to crush you emotionally. But this is where the criticism starts getting interesting, because not everyone bought the ending. Even people who adored the movie admitted the final act gets messy. Once Cooper falls into Gargantua and ends up inside the Tesseract, the famous bookcase dimension scene, critics split hard. Some called it breathtaking, others called it complete nonsense. The biggest dividing point was the movie's obsession with love. Anne Hathaway's sheep speech about love transcending dimensions became one of the most debated scenes in modern sci-fi. Some critics thought it was beautiful, others thought Nolan suddenly swerved from hard science into cosmic Hallmark card territory. That divide never really disappeared. But here's what's fascinating. Even critics who disliked the ending still respected the ambition. One reviewer basically summed it up perfectly by calling Interstellar a beautiful mess, because the movie swings so ridiculously hard at ideas about humanity, sacrifice, extinction, parenthood, and time that people almost forgive it for collapsing under its own weight. Almost. And that's why Interstellar became generation defining, because it tried things most blockbusters are terrified to attempt. It wanted to be emotional and scientific, intimate and cosmic, grounded and metaphysical all at once. And for a lot of critics, that ambition mattered more than whether every piece fit perfectly. But then, something unexpected happened. Years later, another sci-fi story showed up with almost the exact opposite tone and somehow landed just as hard emotionally. And if Interstellar is a cathedral, Project Hail Mary is basically a garage workshop held together with duct tape, whiteboards, and panic. Which brings us to the second half of this showdown. This is where things get weird. Project Hail Mary should not work as well as it does. On paper, it sounds absurdly niche. A science teacher wakes up alone on a spaceship with amnesia, spends most of the story solving physics problems, and eventually befriends a giant spider rock alien who communicates through musical chords. That sounds like the kind of story only hardcore sci-fi nerds would love. Instead, critics started calling it one of the most entertaining hard science novels in years. And somehow, one of the most emotional, too. That shocked people, because Andy Weir's reputation after The Martian was very specific. Critics saw him as the math guy, the writer who could turn engineering problems into suspense, the king of making spreadsheets weirdly exciting. Project Hail Mary doubles down on all of that. The science is everywhere. Astrophage propulsion systems, orbital mechanics, alien biology, radiation calculations, chemistry experiments, fuel equations, problem-solving montages stacked on top of more problem-solving. And yet, critics kept saying the same thing over and over. I didn't expect this to make me cry. That's the twist. Reviewers loved the realism, but they got emotionally attached to the friendship, specifically Rocky. Rocky became an instant sci-fi icon almost by accident. Critics described him as the most lovable alien in modern science fiction. Fans started quoting him constantly. Scientists praised the way Weir built his biology around high-pressure environments and silicon-based life. But the real reason Rocky works is simpler than that. He's kind. That's it. Project Hail Mary blindsides people because beneath all the astrophysics and survival mechanics, it's really a story about cooperation, about two completely different species slowly learning how to trust each other through science. Critics loved that dynamic. The language learning scenes especially became legendary among readers. Watching Grace and Rocky slowly decode each other's communication turns into the emotional core of the entire book. And unlike Interstellar, where science often creates suffering, Project Hail Mary treats science almost like friendship itself. Every experiment brings the characters closer together. Every problem solved becomes emotional progress. That tonal difference is what critics found fascinating. Interstellar uses physics to remind humanity how small and powerless we are. Project Hail Mary uses physics to argue the opposite, that intelligence, curiosity, and cooperation might actually save us. Even the apocalypses feel different. Interstellar's dying Earth feels slow, dusty, hopeless, a civilization quietly collapsing under entropy. Project Hail Mary's crisis is immediate. The sun is dimming, humanity is on a countdown, but the tone stays weirdly optimistic. One critic joked that it's the most cheerful extinction event ever written. And somehow, that optimism worked. Critics said the book feels energizing instead of crushing. Instead of cosmic despair, you get constant ingenuity, constant adaptation, constant problem solving. But just like Interstellar, Project Hail Mary also has critics who bounced off it hard. Some reviewers thought the endless science explanations became repetitive. Others said Ryland Grace sometimes feels unrealistically competent, like a man who can solve literally anything if given enough whiteboards and caffeine. And Andy Weir's humor definitely split people too. If you don't click with his style, the book can feel like an endless stream of science jokes during the apocalypse. But even skeptical critics usually admitted one thing: the ending hits hard. Because Grace's final choice, giving up Earth forever to save Rocky and the Iridians, completely reframes the story emotionally. Suddenly, the goofy teacher becomes tragic. And critics loved that transformation. One reviewer called it the most emotionally satisfying act of platonic devotion in modern sci-fi. Another said the friendship sneaks up on you so effectively that by the end, saving Rocky matters more than saving humanity. That's wild. And honestly, that's why Project Hail Mary entered the same conversation as Interstellar in the first place, not because it's bigger, because it understands the exact same thing Interstellar understands. Science fiction only works when the science eventually becomes emotional. That's the secret. Interstellar turns relativity into heartbreak. Project Hail Mary turns problem solving into friendship. One devastates you with time, the other heals you with connection. And that's why critics can't stop comparing them. So, which one actually wins? Honestly, that depends on what you want from science fiction. If you want overwhelming spectacle, existential dread, gigantic emotions, and a movie that feels like it's trying to swallow the universe whole, critics still lean toward Interstellar. But if you want precision, warmth, optimism, and a story where intelligence itself becomes heroic, more and more people are pointing toward Project Hail Mary. And maybe the strangest part is this: they're both saying the same thing. Human beings survive impossible things when they refuse to give up on each other. One says it with black holes, the other says it with a spider rock engineer named Rocky, and somehow both work. So now it's your turn. Which one hit you harder? Was it Cooper watching decades disappear in minutes while his children grew old without him? Or Ryland Grace giving up home forever to save the one friend who truly understood him? Drop your pick in the comments, because critics still can't agree. And honestly, that might be the best thing about both stories.